Good afternoon, everyone. We'll begin in just one moment while people are logging in. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Orchestrating DevOps from Customer to Code. This is part 1, Integrating Customer Request Management. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with the link when it's available. Today's Q&A session will be handled electronically. You'll see a Q&A panel on your Zoom interface. Please enter your questions there, and our presenter will address them during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Our presenter today is Joe Schultz, AVP Emerging Technology with Oracy. I'll now turn it over to Joe.
Okay. Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate the intro. And welcome, everyone, to our Orchestrating DevOps webinar. This is the first webinar in a 4-part series. This one will cover customer request management. In future webinars over the next 3 months, we'll also talk about development management, test management, and then finally wrap it all up with a discussion around applying metrics analysis to all of this DevOps stuff. So that's our kind of overall agenda. Today we're going to focus then on the customer request management, the beginning of the process, basically the tip of the spear when it comes to DevOps. My name is Joe Schultz. As Chris said, I'm AVP Emerging Technology at Oracy, and so I work with a wide variety of customers around the globe on DevOps types practices. That can take the form of a lot of different kinds of work, anywhere from agile process through integration needs, through business intelligence and reporting, metrics analysis kind of stuff. But all of this revolves around, all of my work at least, revolves around improving efficiency and automation for my customers. So today we're going to talk about the continuous DevOps flow integration. That's a term we put together for this particular webinar series, and it kind of sums up the overall process for what we're going to talk about. Essentially, creating an automation process around DevOps that is continuous, that is automated and meant to integrate in real time across all the various lifecycle stages. And we want to increase flow. That word flow is important because flow has to do with moving data and moving feedback loops across different roles and different responsibilities in the life cycle. And then finally, I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm actually going to talk about how you could link things like ServiceNow and Jira together for this customer request management piece. Okay, so what is continuous DevOps flow integration? And that sounds like some big fancy word, right? But in reality, DevOps flow integration is just all about bringing the various roles of the software delivery lifecycle all together into a coordinated, unified approach. Now, from Oracy's perspective, we tend to deal more with the software delivery part of that integration. But of course, keep in mind that DevOps spans everything from that first line of code that's written all the way through deploying that to servers. So there's a lot of operational aspects to DevOps that I won't really touch on in this webinar series, but that are also an integral part of the process. And Oracy has divisions that address that kind of activity as well. So from my perspective, a DevOps flow integration is all about connecting these systems from planning to release. It's ideally, as I mentioned, continuous means that it's an automated transformation. So we're moving data and assets from stage to stage in an iterative kind of method, and we're doing that through automated integrations so that there's not a person having to sit in the middle. I mean, people are still, of course, validating and verifying the process, making sure that the information and the assets that are flowing are of the quality that's expected. But the idea is you don't want to have people have to get involved in each step and click a button. Because as soon as you introduce a person clicking a button, you've introduced wait times, you've introduced additional delays in the process, and ultimately additional cost. Flow integration also involves bidirectional feedback. So it's not enough to just move data down the pipeline. You have to be able to feed back information into the previous stages. This is good for communications, of course. It keeps people involved along the way so that the sponsors know what's happening during development, or the developers know what's happening during release, etc. But it's also critical because not everything's going to get done right the first time. I mean, we'd all like to believe that the world is a perfect place and nobody's ever going to make mistakes, but we also all know that that's not true. So you've got to be able to feed back those mistakes, those errors, those omissions, anything that would impair our quality of the delivered product, and so that we can fix that and then iterate again. That's the whole idea of iteration, of course. I mean, iterative is really just a waterfall process, but done in a bidirectional fashion. And the problem is that waterfall processes didn't incorporate those structured and real-time kinds of feedback loops. And that's why waterfall has kind of, fallen by the wayside, because it's an expensive way to build software. In this iterative model, we feed back information back to the beginning so that we can make changes along the way. And of course, the whole goal of a flow integration process of any kind of DevOps process is that we're trying to make it better, faster, cheaper, of course, right? So we're trying to eliminate waste and remove these extra work that people have to do for no reason. So what's this look like? So here's an example of a software delivery process that you might deploy in your environment. I'm just going to use some generic terms here in this particular webinar, but you probably have your own terminology and your own lingo for how this works. But the basic steps are pretty much the same for every software developer. It all starts with planning. Someone has to decide what's going to be in our software, whether it's a brand new product or whether we're just doing a maintenance release. We have to scope and decide what goes into it. And most often, the key asset for that stage of the life cycle are the customers themselves. We've got to know from prospects what they want in the product. We've got to know from customers what doesn't work today. So we have to analyze help desk tickets and things like that. We have to look at that population of users and decide what happens, what's happened in the world, and how we have to address that with our plan. Once the DevOps planner, something like a sprint manager or scrum master, has put together a plan, then development has to actually iterate against that. So we start creating sprints and releases and cycles and maintenance patches and hot fixes and all those assets, all those deliverables that development creates along the way, depending upon the life cycle of the product. And that has to, of course, still be in concert with the plan that was originally put forth. And ideally, we want to be feeding that development progress all the way back to the original source of those plans, which, as I said, is the customers. So we need an integrated communication channel all the way from customer through code. And then after development, or during development in most cases, we're actually looking at the validity or the quality of those assets as well. So there's a whole set of quality assurance work that happens, whether it's done as an integrated part at the unit test kind of level, or whether it's something that's done after the fact as user acceptance testing, or anywhere in between. We've got to look at things like functionality and security and performance, and actually manage the quality of that deliverable. And again, like before, all of that has to be fed back into the rest of the life cycle. I mean, ideally, if I'm a customer and I've put in a request, I want to be able to see at any moment where that is in the status of development and whether it's past our quality objectives. So that's kind of a generic software delivery process, starting with customer on one side, all the way through code on the other. And as I said, there is also a whole other aspect where we start talking about release management and deployment management, actually moving these assets into production as well. That would be part of this development chain. So that's kind of the delivery process. Now, along the way, we're capturing metrics. In today's world, most people do that manually. So they figure out, okay, well, how long does it take a bug to get fixed in my environment, for example? And that's all done usually through some kind of manual process where somebody's looking at start dates and end dates or something like that and trying to, in a spreadsheet, maybe even calculate some of these rudimentary metrics. But ideally, we want those metrics to fall right out of that DevOps process. So a good DevOps flow integration process also includes metrics analysis along the way. And what should be happening is that each one of these transformational steps in the process, metrics should be falling out of that automatically. It should be being gleaned by the process itself, not by the people, but the process activity itself. So we should be able to identify, for example, what's the mean time to failure for a defect? What's the average first test pass percentage, for example? And we should be able to do that not by a line of code, which some places can do today, but actually derive that based on the business value that we're trying to achieve. So I ideally want to go all the way back to the customer objective and be able to tie those physical assets to the customer objective that we're trying to resolve. That's the only way to get true business value, or what people often talk about as value stream integration within an environment like this. We want automated metrics to be dropping out of the process. So that's kind of the overall process. This is what I mean when I talk about a continuous DevOps flow integration process. It's something that involves all of these components and captures metrics along the way. Now, in today's world, in today's webinar at least, what we're going to talk about is the beginning of that process, the tip of the spear, as I said. We're going to talk about how customer management and help desk rolls into DevOps planning so that the Scrum Master is not working in a vacuum. And I refer to that as integrating customer request management. We basically want to bring this customer request component into our world of development. I mean, people do that today through requirements analysis and focus groups and things like that. But that's usually a very manual process. And because it's a manual process, it ends up being expensive. And because it's expensive, people skimp on it as much as they can. So the whole point is that we want to integrate this in an electronic fashion and provide automated notification across that region lifecycle so that from DevOps planning onward, we now have customer requests directly, electronically, in an automated fashion integrated into this lifecycle. The whole idea is that we're trying to engage the customers and avoid these boring status meetings and telephone calls and PDF reports that people have to wade through. We want people to get real-time notification about what's going on. And I, as a customer, need to be enabled to see what my vendor is doing about the problem that I've reported. So we want to engage those customers directly into that life cycle. Now, why is that important? Well, let's take an example. There was a case study I've read recently about Uber. I assume you all are familiar with Uber, a ride-sharing service. And back a while on New Year's Eve, demand was so heavy that the system was invoking their surge pricing model, and some of the prices just scaled out of hand very quickly. There were users that reported paying over $100, for example, for very short rides. And there was a huge social media backlash around that. People, tweeting very derogatory comments and talking about their prices and saying they'd never use the vendor again, et cetera. So it was a kind of a big black eye for Uber at the time. And the bad part was that the company, Uber, knew about this, and they were obviously trying to work toward it, a resolution. I'm sure they had all the best intention for how to resolve this problem. But what happened was it wasn't fast enough, and the feedback wasn't integrated well enough, according to this case study. And later that same year, during Hurricane Sandy, the very same thing happened again. The same users often saw that the surge pricing was scaling the costs up out of range. And so Uber, in kind of a reactionary mode, trying to reduce the damage so they didn't have the same kind of backlash they had the first time, they end up absorbing the cost. So the surge pricing model, the vendors, the drivers got paid the surge prices, but the users didn't have to pay that. So the company basically had to eat that cost. And, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of the hurricane event. And again, even with that proactive stance, there was a lot of negative publicity around it as well. And today, in fact, some people still report not trusting Uber surge pricing, that when they see the surge pricing, they immediately click out of the app and pursue other options. So the whole point is that, this technology innovation that Uber tried to introduce actually caused them some problems. And without having a good pulse on how it would affect the customers and how the customers felt about it, it became a repetitive problem that cost them literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. So this is an example where, had we had a good pulse, had they had a good pulse on the customers, and had the customers directly involved in that defect resolution process to resolve the first issue they ran into around New Year's Eve, then we could have potentially avoided the later costs in the life cycle. Okay, so how does this look in real life? I've told you a lot of words. I've talked about an example, but what does this really mean in real life? So I'm going to give you a really simple example. A very common scenario these days around customer request management involves tools like ServiceNow, Salesforce, and Jira. So those of you on the phone are probably in the development space, so you've probably heard of Jira. Jira is a development planning type tool, very often used for creating the sprint and release cycle definitions, for managing issues, all the communication involved around that. It's usually a development-centric tool or a technical tool, and not as often exposed to end users, although sometimes it's used as end users as well. On the other side of the chart, on the left-hand side of the chart, we've got our customers, and most often people are using tools like, for example, ServiceNow or Salesforce to integrate, to interface with their customers. ServiceNow, for example, is provides a lot of functionality around help desk management, among other things. And so a lot of times when you're logging cases in to a help desk, it's often going into a ServiceNow backend. And so the life cycle of that customer request lives in ServiceNow, whereas the life cycle of the development plan lives in Jira. And so there's a disparity between those two, a discrepancy. And what's important is to move that information from one side to the other. So I'll show you a very simple example today where, for example, we'll take a request that comes out of ServiceNow. So somebody might key in a bug report, let's say. And I want that bug report now to become part of the development planning lifecycle over in Jira. And that's where we have to employ automation. That's where we build a continuous DevOps flow process. And the example I'll show you today involves a product called ConnectAll. ConnectAll is a data synchronization, data management kind of tool. And the idea is that it integrates directly from one product to another. ConnectAll supports a wide variety of products. We'll talk more about that later. But the point is, in this example, it can move data from ServiceNow to Jira and back in a bidirectional kind of fashion. It could also involve Salesforce as an example. So this isn't just limited to binary connections. It literally can move data between any number of connected tools based upon the workflow process that you need to deploy. So it monitors the workflow inside of ServiceNow and inside of Jira and keeps the two in sync while respecting the workflow rules on both ends. So it's meant to automate that transformation, just like I talked about before. And it provides that bidirectional feedback. So I can have a conversation, an electronic conversation, where I'm keying into ServiceNow and you're using Jira, but yet we see each other's information and we can communicate in real time between each other. So it is truly a bidirectional feedback loop. And it allows people then to stay in the tools that they already know and love, the tools that you have spent thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars implementing in your environment and have tuned to your specific needs. So rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater and making everybody use one tool, the different groups in the organization can stay in the tool they need to use, and then we use ConnectAll to keep them in sync. So that's the example I'll show you. I'll show you a very simple example right now, just to give you an idea of how that works. But the intent is that we can use the ConnectAll tool to link any of these processes together. So let's show it to you. I'm going to go ahead and jump out of PowerPoint here, and we will open up. Let's start with ServiceNow. So the scenario that I gave you a minute ago was a customer had a problem. They want to enter a ticket. Now this is ServiceNow here on the screen. Very often users don't actually see this ServiceNow interface. Most often it's coming from an online interface through some web browser. And the end result is the data gets injected into the ServiceNow screen. But just for ease, I'll show you, I'll actually log this right here inside of ServiceNow. So let's pretend I'm a user. So here I am, Joe Schultz, and I'm this new user, and I'm trying to tell my developers, the people that wrote the software that I'm using, that there's a problem. So I'm going to create a brand new incident here in ServiceNow. And I'm just going to fill in some of the basics here on the screen to give you an idea. Now, of course, we all know that users think everything is absolute high priority. So I'll make this high priority at the for both impact and urgency. And I'll put a little description in here. I'll say, okay, Schultz, your app is broken. So that's my description here. And then I'll say, please fix it now, because I need it immediately. And of course, I would put more description in here in real life, and I could do things like attachments and all kinds of things. But I'm just going to do a very simple case here just to show you. So I'll submit this new request, and this becomes a new object inside the ServiceNow repository. So again, whether I entered it like this, or it came in through some captive web page, or it was an email that got converted into an asset, however it gets injected into the process, the point is we have a living, breathing ServiceNow incident report. In this case, it's incident 47489. And what we want to do is we want to move this down the life cycle. So this is where a tool like ConnectAll comes in. If I open up ConnectAll then, you'll notice that ConnectAll, this is ConnectAll's main screen, ConnectAll has what we call application links. And these are essentially the pipelines between the two endpoints that we're trying to hook up. So in this example, I have a ServiceNow incident linking to a Jira bug. You'll notice I've got a whole bunch of other links here in the list on the screen, but the only one that I have turned on for this demo, the only one that's enabled, is this ServiceNow to Jira. So the whole point with ConnectAll is that you can create any kind of relationship between any tool that's supported in any direction for any object type. Lots of any's in that sentence. To create a new link like this, you literally just drop the list down. So I go to the left-hand side here, and I pick the applications I want to work with. And so in this example, I'll say we're going to pick ServiceNow from the list, and we'll pick Jira on this side. Direction, of course, is irrelevant because links are inherently bidirectional. And then I would create a new link with this Map Apps button. That would create for me on the right-hand side a link for the specified bug and filter and criteria that I put in. There's a three-step wizard that you go through when you create a new link, and you're essentially just identifying the server you're going to connect to, the object types that you want to link, and then the fields that you want to map. So this link has been created ahead of time. It's running in the background. And if we look now at the ConnectAll activity dashboard, you'll notice that while I was just talking, it's already synced up. So this new object that I created over in ServiceNow, which is this big, ugly name here, you'll notice it has the incident number 47489, like I just said, actually created now a new object over in Jira. So it's number 317, for example, in the Schultz Widgets project. And now these two assets are linked. So we've moved data from ServiceNow to create a corresponding object into Jira. And there's a linkage there so that changes flow bi-directionally. So now I, as a developer, can have an electronic online conversation with my consumer, my customer, who only sees the ServiceNow side of the equation. If we take a look at that in Jira, for example, I'll pop up the Jira interface. So, now I'm switching my hats. Imagine me taking off my customer hat, I'm putting on my developer hat. So now I'm looking at my development to-do list, and it's blank right now, but if I refresh this screen, we'll see that this new bug report was created based upon the ServiceNow incident that was created by the customer. So here it is, Schultz, your app is broken. You'll notice it's highest priority. It's got the description that the user entered, etc. We can see even the incident number, the link directly into ServiceNow. So if I wanted to, I could use that to pop over into ServiceNow and look at the details there. But ideally, I don't need to. I can stay in my Jira interface and I can see anything that happens to this object in ServiceNow and vice versa. So for example, I might say, okay, well, this is a real problem. As a developer, I've got to fix it. So I'm going to go ahead and mark it in progress. So I'll use the Jira function to change the status to advance the workflow to the in progress state. So now this is in progress. And I might even build something. Maybe I'll add an attachment here. So I'll put a little screen mock-up. And I'll ask the user, is this okay? Is this screen mock-up the right kind of thing to fix this problem? So I'm doing that through a Jira attachment in this example. I can even do things like add comments. So I can say, does the attached image satisfy your concern? Or whatever it is. And so we can have this conversation electronically in the tools that we like to stay in. So I can stay in Jira, the user stays in ServiceNow. So I'm making changes here, and just like before, when the new object flowed across automatically, if I pop back into ConnectAll, you'll notice that the updates are also flowing back automatically. So ConnectAll is keeping track of both sides of the equation, and it's flowing changes back and forth as necessary. So in this case, it updated the ServiceNow object from the Jira source. And if we would pop over, just to prove to you that there's no smoke and mirrors going on here, if I pop back over to ServiceNow and click on that object, you'll notice that here's the attachment. So this sample screenshot that was attached is now there. You'll notice that the state now is active rather than new, so it's been advanced in the workflow. And I even have the comment down below in the comment section here as well. And so we can have an entire transaction history between these two tools, an entire electronic conversation, without ever having to leave the environment that you like. So that's the idea of ConnectAll. That's the idea of this development flow integration. The example I just gave you was showing integration between ServiceNow and Jira, but of course ConnectAll can support 40-ish different applications, and those named applications. And so you can put anything in any combination. You'll notice I could bring requirements in from Gemma. I could bring, I talked about reports and defects in from Salesforce, or whatever it might be, whatever your entry point is, whatever your systems your customer is using, we can use those to interface with the development tools, which then become the beginning of the development process. In later sessions, later webinars in this series, of course, we'll talk about then how to integrate that development plan to the actual development coding activity, and then even to the quality assurance testing that's happening at the same time. I mentioned a lot of tools. Here are the 40 that ConnectAll supports. You'll notice that it's mostly DevOps, software delivery kinds of applications. So things like help desk systems, customer request management systems, project management systems, project planning tools, coding tools, version control repositories, quality assurance tools, those kinds of things. So it's the software delivery part of the life cycle. There are also two custom adapters on the right-hand side of the screen there that ConnectAll supports. that allow universal connections, that we actually refer to that as the universal adapter. And that lets you connect to essentially any API or database that you need to. So even if we don't have a named adapter for your asset, we can build, using the universal adapter, an integration directly to that custom asset. So it lets you or us build a workflow to integrate kind of non-standard or proprietary tools as well. Okay, and so with that, I'm going to take some questions from the field about anything that we've talked about here today. Let me open up my question and answer panel here. We'll take a look and see what we have. Okay, so here's one question that came in. It says, do all customer requests become JIRA bugs? And I guess the answer to that is it depends. That's my favorite answer to questions, of course. It depends. What it depends upon is what you want to happen. The idea with a tool like ConnectAll, the idea with a flow integration process like I'm describing, is that you would decide the conditions on which things flow from one step to the other. So for example, I would normally assume that not all customer requests in ServiceNow are going to become development requests. Not everything's going to flow into JIRA. I mean, for example, if I'm a user and I forget my password, so I submit a password reset request, that doesn't need to go to the development team. That's probably going to be handled by operations. So in the scenario I described where we're interfacing with JIRA, I probably wouldn't need to send that type of request into the JIRA environment. I might send it instead to an operations planning tool that somebody might use, whether that's something like a help desk system or Salesforce or something like that. I mean, it could be any other kind of application. But the point is, you would decide which requests would go which way in the life cycle and which pieces of information. You could even, in fact, synchronize the workflows. You could decide how you want the workflows to match across. So it could be, for example, that a ServiceNow request comes in, but it's not until it goes through a couple of stages of workflow development inside of ServiceNow. Let's say it has to get approved, and then it has to get triaged, and then it has to get assigned. It's not until the assignment step that actually flows into JIRA. So you can control not only what flows, but when it flows in the overall life cycle. So long answer to the question, but the answer really is we could flow all customer requests into JIRA, but generally speaking, you're not going to want to do that. Instead, you will build custom criteria as part of the ConnectAll definition to decide when and where that happens. Okay. Let's see, what other questions do we have in the list here? Another question is there a limit to the number of links in ConnectAll? And the answer is no, emphatically no. There is no limit to the number of links, the number of projects, the number of objects, the number of synchronized mapped records, any of that kind of stuff. In ConnectAll, you buy the adapter, so you license an adapter for, in our example, ServiceNow and a license for JIRA. And once you have those two licenses, you can synchronize any number of assets across any number of projects, any number of workflows, any number of links, etc. It's essentially unlimited once you've bought the adapter. And then another question here, does ConnectAll support BMC remedy? Yes, there was a list of 40-ish tools. I kind of flipped through it, I guess, a little bit quickly for everybody to read. But you can go back and look at this recording if you need to see the entire list again, or send me an email. We do support remedy as well as a number of other help desk systems too. So whether it's JIRA to JIRA, or it's ServiceNow to JIRA, or BMC to JIRA, or it could be BMC to ServiceNow as a collector, then to JIRA. I mean, any combination of those kinds of customer support systems you could use to build a process. Okay, if you do have other questions, feel free to put them into the chat window, or you can also email us after the fact. I'll put up an email here in just a second. We do record all the questions throughout the webinar. So we'll get back to you with questions, with answers afterwards. And so kind of in conclusion, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, one of the things that we would like to offer to all of the people who are on the webinar here today is a free DevOps consultation. So, I will get engaged with you if you're interested, and we'll do a session to analyze best practices for your environment. Talk about what's possible, talk about the tools you're using, what makes sense, look at both process and stakeholder education, and kind of set priorities or help you identify what makes the most sense. Where's the biggest bang? I tend to be a pretty pragmatic kind of person, so just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And so what I try and help people to identify is what makes business sense? Where can we make money? Where can you make money by implementing a practice like this? And places where, yes, we could do it, technically speaking, but the benefits are negligible. I would say you prioritize those very lowly, very low, or take them off the list altogether. So we'd like to offer this kind of consultation to anyone that's on this live webinar today. Feel free to contact me directly. My name is Joe Schultz again, and my email is there on the screen, joeschultz@orec.com. And we can arrange to set up something at your convenience. The other thing I'd like to point out is that this is, as I said, the first webinar out of a 4-webinar series. So the next one in the series, number 2, is integrating development management. We'll talk about extending what I talked about today with customer requests and implementing that integration, that DevOps flow integration, directly into the development world, down to the code level, where we can track which pieces of code, for example, are affected by which customer requests or which contribute to the resolution of customer defects, etc. So tying that customer directly to the developer, essentially, so that the customers can track status and they can participate in the discussion of those assets. So that webinar will be February 18th at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. And you can register for that on the same link you used to register for this webinar on the orec.com website. If you do have any other questions about this webinar or the upcoming webinars, feel free to contact ORC at that email on the screen, sales@orec.com, and the appropriate sales manager will contact you directly. And with that, Chris, I think I'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Joe, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. As Joe mentioned, this is part 1 of a 4-part series, so keep an eye out for email invitations to the upcoming webinars. They are also available on the website, so you can sign up there. Again, the webinar was recorded and you'll receive an email with the link once it's available. If there were any questions that came in last minute that we didn't address, we do have a record of those and we'll address them offline. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you and have a great day.